Okay. So thanks for talking with me today, Vik. I'm really excited to hear more about your stories.
Thank you for having me. I am so excited about what you've got going on and happy to share and lend my perspective.
Excellent. So the purpose of our conversation today is to surface your own personal stories about some of the most experimental, high-performing teams that you've ever been fortunate enough to be a part of. And the key thing that I really want to dig into are teams that are disrupting the status quo in order to evolve or adapt. And the word that I've been ruminating on is mutant and mutations, and how there's this belief associated with mutations that mutants are freaks, weirdos, misfits. And really, I believe that mutations are how life has persisted over millennia, and how we, both as organisms and as organizations, need to evolve and to embrace weird or different behaviors in order to better adapt, because change is the only constant right now. So that's the topic for today.
I love it. I love it. I think this is phenomenal. As I reflect on my career and I think about the Fortune 100 company experience I've had, the tech startup experience that I've had, and even the most recent independent consulting experience that I have, I think let's start with one story
Yeah.
and let's build on that and see if where we want to take it. But I'm happy to share a perspective that fits in line with what you're thinking and what you've described as a mutant, which I think is a phenomenal title, especially given what's happening right now in the world. And March 2020, with what's going on, we're all being asked to adapt, and it's a struggle for many. Right? You've gone from a day-to-day regimen where you might have gone to the office, grabbed a cup of coffee, talked to some colleagues. The environment has now changed, and now you're being asked potentially to stay at home,
Mm-hmm.
not be in large groups and crowds. So we're not sitting in an auditorium or a classroom or what have you. And so I think I've got a good story that's in line with that actually might surprise you.
Okay, I'm excited to hear it. And you mentioned the fact that we both started out at a Fortune 100 company, and an interesting nugget is that we both started out as engineers, and both of our careers have taken kind of very different trajectories. With me, I kind of took this organizational design and behavior path, and you very much pivoted into sales and marketing, executive leadership, and now consulting. And when I reflect on my experiences at a Fortune 100 company working on many experimental teams, the key things that I've reflected on are the fact that experimental teams are kind of like a bubble within a larger system. And there's two things that really stand out for me. One is strategic alignment. So despite the fact that these experimental teams I've worked on have been a bubble, there's always been a really clear line to the overarching compass direction of the organization's strategic goals, and the fact that we are very much aligned with that. The part that's different, however, the second thing is the cultural piece. And the culture of the experimental teams I've been on has very much been a counterculture. The behavioral norms, the values are intentionally different from the larger system to promote those types of experimental behaviors that I think have made all the difference in the world. So what I want to kind of learn from you in your experiences working with smaller organizations is how those pieces of strategic alignment and culture have manifested in the experimental teams that you've worked on. So tell me.
Yeah, it's fascinating, right? Like we can go broad with this, but I would say generally when you think about a technology startup, you're fundamentally in some way disrupting something in some fashion. You're either solving a big pain or problem that exists in the market, or you're seeing something, you're seeing where the hockey puck is going, and you're creating a solution for where you see the change that's about to take place.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say 100% of them are experimental by nature. There are some fundamental frameworks that exist, and I think when you think about startups, they all initially want the same thing. All startups want to be the Fortune 100 company. So it's
Right.
very funny that they want to disrupt, but they actually want to be the same thing. I think some of that is changing a little bit right now. But I would say what I'm seeing as a really, really fascinating trend right now is how do you align to the goals that an organization has, but potentially solve it through what you're saying, this amorphous different team. And the stories that I think really align with that is over the last 3 years, as I've been an independent consultant, and CEOs have come to me, CEOs of startup companies or private equity backed companies have come to me. What's fascinating is how one person can sit with one other person and talk about that problem and get clarity and alignment on what they want to go do together, and then how it builds from there. So for me, as an independent consultant, I work with a lot of folks. I have about 9 or 10 people that fit what I call my global contractor consultant community, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I am able to pull them in, and we are able to assemble as an organization that's going to go solve a problem, and then we can disassemble very quickly, which I think is probably more fundamental from a mutant perspective than anything I've seen in other organizations. We're starting to see them show up in some of these startups and bigger companies, especially as you think about how they're going to grow. And so you'll get folks from different parts of the organization. You'll get a product individual, a marketing leader or individual, someone from sales, someone from people, maybe an executive member. They come together as a strike team to go solve a very particular problem. They solve that problem and they disperse. And
It's
so I would say,
situational.
yeah, I'm seeing that in startups. I've seen that in my own career as an executive, to be able to bring people together and then disperse. I've seen other executives do it, but now I live it, because think about the chaos that one would consider I'm in. I'm an independent consultant. I don't work for any organization. I'm not grounded in like a W-2 income. And so what that requires is so much of a personal vision and a personal purpose, but also a strong sense of belief that there's always going to be problems to solve. There's always going to be opportunities that exist. And as I go and look at those opportunities, obviously those challenges are fundamentally greater than who I am. And so the ability for an individual to have other individuals that are also like them, that are either sitting on the wings, doing their own thing. Like in today's world, if I were to give you a story, working for a CEO who has a challenge in growing their organization and being able to pull experts in user experience and design, an expert in product, an expert in sales, not even sales and marketing, but sales, an expert in go-to-market with demand generation as the function, to bring those folks together, align them on the common goal, not have to do a top-down approach to saying, now you work for me, but we all work together to solve this goal.
Yeah.
They're all peers, and the partnership you're in with the executive is also peer. They know more than I do about their business. But I know more than they do about go-to-market. And so we come together and you're learning and you're growing way more than you could before. And so for me, for my personal story, what I'm finding is not only am I delivering value to the market in exchange for compensation, but also in the last 2 years, now in my 3rd year, I have learned so much in terms of connecting the dots that now I'm seeing new pockets of communities where they're developing in more of your mutant-esque mindset, right? We are building faster, we're prototyping faster. I am meeting makers and hackers all over the world that are building tools that didn't exist a week ago, and in a week they have it ramped up. So I think it's fundamentally part of how we assemble ourselves, and I'm seeing that, but it's also the tools that exist today that allow us to build way faster than we could have before.
That's awesome. So I'm hearing you say that the ability to kind of form a situational, cross-functional team of experts is really important without just the burden of being a kind of a permanent team under the umbrella of an organization. Give me a specific example.
Look at the organizations that are struggling, right? I mean, you and I both spent time at Boeing, and we've seen what, lack of leadership looks like across like probably a decade or two of the work that we've done. Me more from the outside, you know, I've got family that's there. You had been there for quite a bit of time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not to like call it out, but across the world, we're seeing a lack of leadership. And so when you think about these organizations and how they're structured, there's such a massive opportunity for people to lead themselves and find that opportunity where they find a narrow focus that they're best at. You have a huge skill set that's very narrow that, if applied correctly, can drive tremendous impact into a business. I think that's the trend. So I think what you're working on is the timing is great, because what's culminated over the last 20 years from a work perspective, the changes are dramatic, and what we see over the next 20 are going to be incredible.
Yeah, no, it is.
Question.
Well, I want to dig deeper and get a concrete story. Like I know that you've had a chance to work on some really cool projects, and I'd love to hear a specific example of when some of these things that you're talking about happen. Like give me an example of a challenge that you overcame through this method that you're talking about.
Totally. Let's pick a great example. So and the message that you're looking for, the question that you're asking will resonate through the entire story.
Okay.
So there was a company by the name of Leave Logic that was homegrown in Seattle. And the problem came about because the founder was working in Europe and for Microsoft at the time, I believe, and was pregnant. And the leave policy there was totally supportive of, you know, what one would expect from a caring, loving mother to spend that first year with her family. And culturally, it was great because she was able to talk about it openly, and you know, people were so supportive. The community was supportive. Mm-hmm. Microsoft Europe was so supportive. She relocated to Seattle to work for Microsoft, got pregnant again, and the sounding advice was, don't tell your manager. Don't say anything. And that experience left a mark on her, where she went and said, I'm going to improve the experience for people who have to go on maternity and paternity leave. Because so much of that information is actually quite siloed. Even your manager may not know what all the processes are.
The HR organization's separate so often. Yeah. I've lived it.
What your benefits are very complicated. You don't know what you can get. You're nervous about how much time you can take, how much money you're going to get.
Who's going to cover for you? Like, will your projects get done? Yeah, it's complex.
So she goes on this journey and this vision and bootstraps this business with family members to create this phenomenal experience for leave. We get invited to the table. I get invited to the table. I got introduced by one of her employees who had worked with me in the past. And we get invited to the table. I get invited to the table to say, hey, we need you to help us accelerate the revenue line. Okay? At that same time, a massive organization by the name of Unum Financial acquires this company. And the story there for a founder also is like so on pins and needles, because that whole process of getting acquired or being purchased has its own negotiation timeline. And we get brought in, and I get brought in, and I'm looking at this in terms of what do we need here? And I'm like, obviously you need a strategic thought partner and a sparring partner. So I've got you covered there. Then we're looking at, okay, the immediate net effect is you need someone to actually drive and build sales. So I'm able to pull a partner out of Boston, right? That I get introduced to by one of my other partners, who is phenomenal at the sales motion. So we bring him in. Things are humming along really nicely. We're getting some really good clarity on what that process is looking like. Now we want to expand even further. And so I look into my network and I bring a marketing partner who's really, really great at demand generation and how do you set up experiments and leads. And so now we've got a 3-person team supporting a CEO who doesn't have the overhead. The contract is set up and structured such that they can break it at any time. So it puts the onus on us to continue to prove ourselves. And it puts the onus on them to want to like do stuff quickly, and we're all delivering. And now we're bringing in a massive organization and leaders from them who are actually like, how are you doing this? What are you doing? Right? So fast forward maybe 4 or 5 months, 6 months, I find myself at a corporate table with top senior leaders of this acquiring company,
Mm-hmm.
and they're sitting there wondering, what are you doing? How do you do this? You can do that kind of stuff with the internet? All these questions they're asking in terms of how you can grow a company pretty quickly. And we're at the table all answering questions based on our level of expertise, and they're getting the best knowledge that they possibly could, best in class knowledge at that time, because we're also spending time learning from the best.
Yeah.
And so that story now, if you look at it, the executive who founded that company is pretty senior at Unum, and they're taking that same vision and they're applying it in a way that's going to totally disrupt that long-term disability business. And I think it's phenomenal because all these companies in some way, shape, or form are thriving, and in other ways are completely obsolete and dying. And so they need new blood in there. And oftentimes these companies have tried doing it from within, right? And so sometimes they set up a leadership bench, an executive will come in from the outside and they'll build an organization. And we've seen that. They'll build some of their own team, they'll hire out an agency, but there is such a demand for narrow expertise across a number of functions that can come in, get you set up for success, transfer that knowledge into your team, and be gone.
Yeah.
For me, I ended up working with this organization for 2+ years. That was never the plan. The plan was never to work with them for 2 years. The plan was to work with them for 8 months, transfer knowledge, and be out. And I would say most of the time that's the case. But time and time again, from a go-to-market perspective, I am coming in at a strategic level and bringing in experts, best in class in their field. And they're learning, they're growing, we're learning, we're productizing. And I think probably the beauty of the story, Jyoti, is that even on our end, there's no expectation. I've got consultants and contractors that are leveraging the work we did and building their own tools. They're building big businesses that are starting small, and their products, their new services, there's courses, there's workshops. Everybody, it's a win-win scenario. And so I think the big takeaway here is that it's a net positive game, not a zero-sum game. And that's a very hard, when I talk to a new specialist, it's very hard for them to wrap their heads around. I just talked to a gentleman who does a very specific part of sales where he sets up meetings, right, at scale for clients. And the first conversation I had with him, he was like, wait a minute, am I supposed to get this straight that you don't have an agenda here? Like, I can come in and I can help you and I can grow? I'm like, yeah. He's like, this is boggling my mind. I can't even, because every organization he's been part of, they're going to take everything that you have. They're going to suck it all out of you. And here we're all independent. So I'm like, I'm winning. I want what I have for you so you can win too. And so some people get that quickly. Others take some time. Some people don't get it.
That's really brilliant. And I know the value of having an outside fresh perspective. Like one of the terms that we used inside of Boeing was this notion of going native. And it's a term that I've heard my consultant friends use, where when you're inside an organization too long, you go native, and then you can't see with fresh eyes some of the problems that could be staring you in the face. So I see that assembling a network of experts the way you have not only addresses that, but is another benefit of you have access to really a high level of expertise without having to pay an employee to develop that expertise, to learn, and the overhead costs associated with that. So I can see how it's really efficient as well. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about, so when I worked at Boeing, there was always this difference between contractors and outsiders rather than one of us. And so from a cultural perspective, from a belonging perspective, there was always just a little bit more, perhaps just not cynicism, but doubt and questioning, like, are you really here for us? Can you tell me about the time when you worked with this organization and you assembled this team? Can you remember any times where you had to overcome the challenges of not being just inherently one of the team, like having to prove yourself? And what did that look like? Like, what did that trust and that alignment process look like?
So I think one of the ways, so when you get into these kinds of engagements, client selection really matters. And so you have to do a lot of upfront work. One of the things I always talk about with people that are thinking about going into some kind of consulting type roles. I'm saying preparation, the greater the preparation, the greater the opportunity. And so you have to do a lot of upfront work to get that opportunity. And client selection matters too. And I've learned some lessons with tough client selection. I would say with this particular client, the client selection was quite accurate for me, but I did see that manifest with a member of the team. And I thought it was there, but we clearly had not done enough. And we had done some pre-work, right? Like we don't just bring people in, we have a conversation, they get to know how we're going to all operate.
Build rapport.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that. But I think some of it you can solve, some of it you can't. Every single individual is going through their own journey. They've got their own, challenges to overcome. And when you're in an organization where you are full-time and you've got all these people to work with and collaborate with and report to and be accountable to or accountable for, there's a lot that's happening there. Me as the outsider, I don't have any of that. And so one of the challenges is I'm not in it day to day, but the benefit is also I'm not in it day to day. So I am looking for, when someone comes to me and they're frustrated with something, I'm not, a lot of executive coaches are trying to get rid of your frustration. I'm trying to get rid of the problem that's going to get rid of your frustration, because I've been an operator of many businesses, so I've been in that role. And so I would say some of it you can solve, some of it you can't, but it is really challenging when I've seen my team have to prove themselves. I would say for me, if I get myself into that situation or I even feel it, I call it out right away. It's very important to call it out right away. If you sit on that, you don't have really the luxury to sit on that. I'm an independent consultant. It's my life. If I wait and wait, like one day I'm just going to get surprised. So I call it out immediately.
You have to.
Find if people don't, it's really detrimental to them. It's very hard to unwind from that.
Did you find yourself having to do that during your experience with Unum and bringing these other consultants into the picture? Can you remember any times where you had to pull things out?
I thought they were blown away by what we had to do, so we had leverage. Like even as we only offboarded recently, and so even as we offboarded, the number of times someone would want to still have a call, or like they just wanted more of it. I felt we had leverage there. I think the place where we didn't have leverage is when we didn't have trust. And so when somebody thinks that they're smarter in something than we are, it's very much a red flag. We had a lot of conversations internally with our own group on the outside to be like, what do you want to do? Do you want to back out? And we gave it our best effort, but we also drew a line in the sand to say, if we get to this point, then we're going to make a change. And we made many changes. Like that was also part of it, to say, okay, as someone who's bringing these people together, how do I make sure that everybody offboards correctly? How do they find a soft landing the right way? So it's very, I'm having to be very thoughtful if someone's like, Vik, consulting's not right for me, but I want to find a place. Okay, let's build a game plan for how you're going to find the right role. I'm happy to be a reference for you. I'm happy to support you in your search. Other people, it might be, hey, let's offboard this, but I've got some other things that I'm working on. So we'll bring you in there, or you might have something you're working on. So I think that's really critical. But in that particular engagement, we cycled through probably 3 to 4 people before we got the right fit. And that fit ended up being beautiful. And so for me now, pattern recognition also matters. Recently, I talked to a CEO out of Canada, and I talked to my team, and we netted out, man, this CEO, this executive really thinks they have all the answers, and they're going to skip some of our steps. We'll pass. And so,
how do you know that? What does your screening process look like?
So for me, I have a number of questions that I'm asking about, where are they getting the pressure from? What have they tried before? Where they think the problem is. And then as I go further in, I'm also trying to figure out, what will success look like? What are their priorities? What's keeping them up at night? There's a bunch of questions that I have kind of put together. But the first phase of every engagement is a clarity exercise. And that clarity exercise allows us to go in and talk to the organization, collect data, basically put together what we believe is the appropriate plan for moving forward. And none of that is meant to surprise the executive. And oftentimes I'm like, nothing's going to surprise you, but it's a much more thought out plan than they would have. Like they might say, well, one of our ideas is to put this person in this role. Okay, but let me tell you why we need to put the person in the role. Whether there's a person inside the company that can actually do it or not, what that role could look like, what we're trying to drive to, and when we have it, what success will look like. So they're not necessarily thinking through all those things all the time in a startup environment. They're skipping steps. In a big company, that might just take a year to develop. So I'm able to, for a smaller company, give them that rigor. For a larger company, do it faster. And so when I hear someone say, no, I already know the answer, I can skip your first phase, I'm like, no, we're not going to skip the first, because I've skipped the first phase before, and that ends up being a disaster. And now we're doing it over 50 companies, having not skipped that phase more often than not, it's a winner. Because I can also then leave an asset with the executive to say, this is the work that we did. If you end up hiring someone, which has happened, they've hired someone that can do my work. I'm like, let me give this to them. The work has already been done. Like they'll ramp faster. They should be more successful.
Take it and run with it.
We had a company in Santa Clara that actually hired a chief revenue officer in the middle of our engagement. So it was great because I ended up chatting with him, talked to him about the findings, what I would do. He was like, this totally makes sense. This is great. I also talked to him about some uncertainty that I see within the organization. And he was like, I haven't gotten there yet, but thanks for the heads up. This was good. He's still there today, a year later. The company's growing. They've shifted. So, you know, I'm sure we had this much to do with it, but we had something.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So I want to dig a little bit deeper into your experience at Unum and about this team that you assembled. And can you give me an example of any behaviors or norms that you established as a team that you believe helped you be successful? Like, what were some of the norms of communicating, of sharing information, of prioritizing work?
Let me give you one. One of the norms that we established there is around a weekly or monthly cadence of learning. And so when I get asked now, how do you grow companies quickly? I can only say the companies that grow the fastest, more often than not, learn the fastest. And in order to learn the fastest, you have to have a rhythm or some type of infrastructure that's going to bring people together to talk about things like, this is what we did. This is what we thought was going to happen. This is what actually happened. Either right or wrong. And based on being right or wrong, this is what we learned that we're going to do next. And that cadence of doing that every week is so powerful. Like CEOs will say, oh, I don't need to get into the weeds. And I'm like, yeah, I know you don't need to get into the weeds, but if you sat in that meeting, if you had sales, marketing, product in a meeting where they were talking about those things, that's effectively an R&D machine for you.
Yeah.
You're going to learn about competitors well before someone gets funded. Hey, we're hearing rumblings of a company that's doing this. Anybody heard of them? I haven't even heard of them. All right, just add them to the list.
Yeah, that's brilliant. What you're talking about is operationalizing experimentation. And when you have an experiment, being very clear about the boundaries of that experiment, and when you're done with it, what did you learn? And that's when I think about what I didn't see at Boeing, it's that. It's the willingness to say, this was an experiment and it didn't work. So we need to stop doing it and pivot. So that's really neat that you were able to do that.
But I'll tell you, so that's one challenge in bigger companies is they don't have it.
Yeah.
What bigger companies will do instead is they will say, you know, we've got a marketing initiative. Let's allocate $200,000 to that and let's see what happens. And you just blew through $200,000. That's just the spend. Then you had all these people spending their time and it was a waste of time because you didn't get the outcome that you wanted. We ended up spending a fraction of that and getting way more output than they could ever. We tried to get their bigger company into that motion and we couldn't get them into that motion. It was almost like it was like we fed them food and it was thrown up. It was like, this is good for you. And they threw it up. In the smaller companies, the biggest challenge in getting that framework into motion is actually the fear of saying I'm wrong.
That's it.
So I will have time and time again, someone will say, Vik, this feels like homework. I'm like, homework? You're going to learn faster. And then it dawned on me, that it felt like homework because they just didn't want to be wrong. But I was like, why don't you just say the experiments you ran last week were wrong? Like, I had to say it for them, and they were like, well, they weren't really, we didn't really fail. And I'm like, no, you failed. You thought you were going to do this and you didn't, you failed.
Right.
They have a hard time even putting it in the column. But once they got over that, they got it. They were like, oh, it's not failure. It's just the failure to keep experimenting. And so I ask every company this question: how many experiments are you running every month?
Yep.
Most of the time they don't even know. And sometimes they're not running any. Sometimes they are running experiments. They're just not documenting it the right way. And sometimes they're running way more than they could. And that ends up shining a light on, do they have the right people? Do they have the right number of people? Can they collect data fast enough? So I think both ends of the spectrum, big companies, they just don't have the appetite. Think about it. Like, how many of these companies are people sitting there just being so comfortable for weeks or months at a time? There's no repercussion.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, I had friends asking me, because I have family at Boeing, hey, with all this news about the airplane that was grounded, which, by the way, was a great call. Like, does that harm anybody you know working there? And I was like, yeah, right. Yeah, right. You're telling me it's gonna hurt. Like, someone will take the fall for it, but no way someone, like, I mean, yes, maybe some people are affected, but not like, you think about what actually happened, and you would have thought heads would have rolled.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're 100% right. And there's so many reasons that they didn't. The fact that there's, like, it's almost like too big to fail. I hate saying that, but they've got such a diverse portfolio of products that I think they were able to absorb the shock of that. However, if that weren't the case, I do think that they would have taken a bigger hit.
There's a lot of reasons why, and that's why they have very smart financial people in these companies.
100%.
And very smart attorneys, and they've hired the right law firms, and they've got the right accounting and they're connected with the right banks. Like, there's all that kind of stuff that makes sense.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, right, when you're a Leave Logic trying to make an impact on humans' lives, which I'm so grateful that vision continues on within Unum. And when you're Unum and you're worrying about, like, these long-term disabilities, like these plans, you're touching human lives. And I think that brands have gotten away from it. I think we're hearing a lot of brands talk about purpose, which is great. Like, it sounds really great, but at the execution level, it's not happening everywhere. But look, these companies are big. There's going to be waste in all of them. Even as, like, what I do, I just get to be very thoughtful about who I want to work with, who I get to collaborate with. I get to have my impact. I leave, I sleep. But from your perspective about who you're trying to talk to, my gosh, like, there's just a web of interconnected people out there that are doing work, like, in such phenomenal and interesting ways. Yeah. There's makers and hackers that are doing such phenomenal, like, these mutants exist that you're looking for and you want to talk to. And I think this is going to happen. What you're talking about is going to happen at scale in the next 5 to 10 years, because it's much easier to build a piece of software today. It's much easier to sell today. It's much easier to connect with people today. Yeah. And some are doing it. Some don't have a clue what's possible.
It really excites me, because it's not just innovating in terms of products and what our outputs are. Like, it's not just innovating what we're doing, it's innovating how we're doing it. It's innovating our behaviors and our processes. And that's, like, it's magic.
And I'll tell you, this started for me after I got married, and I know you've traveled. We went and lived in South America for a year. I saw so many different ways to live life. And so when you talk about behaviors, and you see people today, and look, honestly, I don't know how many of them are living it. There's a lot of people these days online telling a lot of stories, but I see people that are making, replacing their income, making high 6 figures, making 7 figures, and they're traveling the world. They're living where they want. They're taking their family on experiences. They've set up a home office, and they're just spending time with their family, picking up their kids, dropping their kids off, taking them to soccer games. There is a way to live like that, where You don't have to be burned out. You don't have someone yelling at you. You're not worried about your review, or you're the person that's not having to run the annual review around like who we're going to hire and budgeting process. I see that a lot. And I think, you know, once you get hooked to the juice of, you know, the W-2 income at any level, you get excited about it. And so I think there's a lot of ways to live. And I would say I'm very new to this, right? I'm only in my 3rd year as an independent consultant, but I now get to, not only in my role do I get to collaborate with these people and work with these executives and these companies, but now I get to partner with companies, right? I'm working on this water bottle company with some great entrepreneurs out of Santa Barbara. And we're talking about, you know, supply chains and what that's going to look like. And we're talking about, hey, what's happening today? And how do you actually take this to market? And we're taking it to market on Kickstarter, which is such another story that I could talk to you about. But I get to collaborate with these entrepreneurs in ways that I couldn't before. And, you know, even to operate as a venture partner for a fund. Like, these are not things that like need to be broadcast all the time, but the opportunities for me are also like increasing. And so I find that when you go native, I think the opportunities actually like get smaller in terms of what you might want to create. You can still do it. You can, I'm not saying.
Yeah. And they do for the individual, you know, but I can't help but think that this work, as more people are leaving organizations, for, like leaving the traditional 9 to 5 in droves, what's left, you know? And I think it's really important for us to think about creating or applying what we're learning into these organizations so that the native version of reality is better, it's improving, it's starting to adapt to the larger system. It has to.
It has to. The change is coming. People will lead the change. I don't think they should be looking for a trend line. You're creating a trend line and things are moving in that direction. I think the people that are leaving are the best. I think the best talent is starting to leave because they're like, I can set up my own infrastructure and I can be happier. I can not only make the same or more, but I have so much more disposable income.
Yeah.
What you're going to have as you see more and more people make that shift is that infrastructure around them is going to build, right? How do I get insurance at an affordable price point? How do I get health insurance at an affordable price point? How do I make sure I live the right way? And you're going to see a whole group of people starting to create tools and services for them.
It's so funny. And that's totally like the independent consultant like perspective. And I also can see the organizational perspective where the talent is leaving in droves. All of a sudden, retention and talent management becomes so important, you know.
Oh my gosh.
Everything.
We can, I mean, it's why the Facebooks and the Googles of the world throw out so much money when anyone says I want to leave, if they know they're good.
Yeah. Yep. Oh, we could talk about this all day.
There's so much to talk about. I'm so glad we got to pick on like one story as the theme and kind of branch from there. But there's so much more to talk about. And I think as you kind of go on this journey, you're going to find so many people. I'm happy to introduce you to others. But
awesome.
Yeah, there's a lot of friends that I have that are making that shift and moving out. And there's also people that are creating lots of very interesting infrastructure within large organizations. Look, they see the writing on the wall. They're going to try. But a lot of these companies have M&A teams and corp dev teams because they want to acquire these companies. We saw, you saw Facebook do it with WhatsApp, and we saw that with Instagram.
Yeah.
And so I think you're going to see other companies, like you see Walmart doing it, right? You see Procter & Gamble doing it. They're figuring it out. They're seeing.
Are. It's neat. So just to kind of tie a bow on the Unum story, it sounds like you were able to really help this company go from a concept that was just really about something really important, which was making the user experience for parents returning to work or taking leave from work better. And it sounds like you were able to kind of really help this company grow and get clear on their sales and marketing and develop a healthy business model from it. Can you tell me how, like a moment in time where you knew you were successful? Like, tell me, when you look back on that experience, what was the moment where you were like, our work here has been a success? And how did you know that?
The first spot I knew it is within 1 month, and I always look for the shortest way to give maximum impact, because that's the way you build trust. And I think some of these bigger companies, you get longer runway to have impact. I don't have that luxury. I got 30-day window. How can I keep shrinking that to have impact? Within the first 30 days, the way we were talking, the CEO, us on sales calls, had totally shifted 180. We went from talking about what we did to actually talking about things through the lens of the buyer, asking questions of the buyer, understanding the pain, really that we knew the answer, but we were getting them to talk about it a ton. And I knew right away, I was like, because we were hearing the same thing, right? In a month, we were like, they all have this pain. They all don't have a solution for it. No one cares about them. Tech hasn't come to this part of the market. It was like music to my ears. And we were signing up household name brands that were signing up. That was the first step. The second was as I saw the new customers signups coming in at a faster clip than they had come in before. They were just coming in. And by the time we had surpassed the total count we had in the beginning, I was like, yeah, this is a no-brainer. When we went out and started offering tools and experimenting, we were like, wow, where are these people located? We were able to find where they were. We were able to leverage all the tools that we could to identify who the buyer was. And I would say once they got in, we were trying to identify what made them successful with the offering. And so those would be like the three things that I saw. But the very first one was we started talking differently. They started talking differently. And I knew.
That's awesome. I hear that staying connected to your purpose, and there's that word purpose again, like conversations about your user and empathizing with your end user and really seeing the world through their eyes, I think just helps clarify your purpose in a way that is, it's like crystal clear. And that's what I'm picking up with that story. So cool.
I mean, look, my purpose is very clear. How do I maximize my peace and how do I increase my power? That's my purpose. Because if I'm living in peace with maximum power, I can share that with others. And I think it works for me. And when it resonates with someone else, I think it attracts them. And you know this from your work. You live the way you want to live and people get attracted to it. It's why now, like, think about this as a difference. We can get into this later. But I don't really go out there to sell what I do. People come to me. I designed it that way, so that took some time. But what a great way to live. I'm here. If you want my help, I'm here to help.
That's it.
You don't want my help, you don't need my help. And if you want to come back later, if you don't want my help, it's cool. We're still friends. We're totally, like, there's no animosity. And if you come back later, I'm not going to say I told you so or made you feel bad. I don't.
No. I'm hearing abundance coming from a place of abundance.
Oh, we can talk about that's a whole nother subject.
Well,
gratitude we can talk about all day long.
All right. Well, let me just thank you for sharing your wisdom with me and whoever else watches this. It's really nice to get to dig deep on a particular example of one of your projects. So thank you.
Man, so many stories. Thank you so much for having me. Really, really appreciate it. You know, one person's perspective, two people just having a conversation. I hope whomever is listening to this, whenever they're listening to this, they get one or two things out of it that they can take, you know, in their life.
I do too. All right. Thanks.
Thanks.